Nobody listens to our dreams of what we have been hoping. But because we love each other and we keep on poking, the doors of creativity can finally be open. You know that we are artists, you know that we are dreamers. We are a family full of fun and strong believers. And together we're believing in a lot of things. One of us that our futures will be supreme. We believe in each other, love, jump to find the one that we are each other's father, sister, brother, believer, mother. We will always be there for one another. We are the light in moving out heaven.
We are the pieces in the day. We are the spark in the night. The spark that burns our lives. We sing with all the might. We are the blue of the rainbow. We are the light in the dark. We hold each other up when life is hard.
I wanna feel like I belong. I can't feel it if the love is not strong. That's why we writing this song. You can sing along, tag along, as he find the difference once he find it wrong. On a mission to find peace, tragedy and police, where everyone has the guidance to stay safe in the streets, like wandering little bees, relentless but complete. Without each other, we might be subject to cease in existence. Stand with us. It's not an act, it's a plea to your tolerance. The world is shook and it seems so cruel. I'm about to tell you something, so come and listen up. I'll only tell you one, two in the front, even if you put it back. It's over time and anytime they take control and they kick back. Populations being run by image, every region, action, LGBT, the truth are not accepted. That's just what the solution's simple. It ain't like popping pimples. Just listen to our words, the fire will soon rekindle. Yeah, we can save the world, all we gotta do is try. Finding a rhythm in the system, we can stand up and unite.
We are the pieces in the day. We are the spark in the night. The spark that burns our lives. We sing with all the might. We are the blue of the rainbow. We are the light in the dark. We hold each other up when life gets hard. We are the peace, we are the peace, we are the peace. We are the peace, we are the peace, we are the peace. We are the peace, we are the peace, we are the peace. We are the peace, we are the peace, we are the peace.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Table for More, Session 2. We are happy to have with us Philip Schultz and two very distinguished guests that he will introduce. He has a personal relationship with them, and we're so grateful for their wisdom and their expertise and their beauty of heart that they will share with us today. So Philip, thank you for being here, and let's get started.
Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you all again, and I will probably change locations as it's just started to rain, and I don't want to subject you to that. I go outside because I have two little kids, and while it's cute for them to join most Zoom calls, I decided it wasn't cute for them to join these webinar presentations. Let me give you a little bit of background of where we're going to go today. Kind of here's our setting the table, what we're going to do. We're going to review our shopping list, you know, kind of what we're looking for in our conversations with each other and our interactions with each other, some introductions, and then we're going to unpack our groceries, which are the ingredients for change. That'll be the presentations by Quanice and Tassidra. Some Q&A between both presentations, and then we'll lead into breakout groups and come back and talk about next week. So just a reminder from our first session, these were the 12 things on our shopping list that I asked you to think about as we engage in this time together. And I won't read all of them. I just put them all up at once so that you can go back and take a look and to see which one might stand out to you the most, where you need to really be present. For me, it's always listening to understand is the one that I'm not listening to answer, but I'm listening to understand and committing to the curiosity that I don't have all the decisions made. So with that in mind, I want to put two things in front of you as kind of a precursor to these wonderful presentations. The idea of cognitive dissonance. Last week I asked you to lean into discomfort and to challenge the dissonances from what brought you to this conversation to the core values of your organization as they are now. And this quote is perfect in reminding us that sometimes, and we're all fit into this category, sometimes we hold core beliefs that are so deeply rooted within us that even when we're presented with evidence that shows that we should abandon this core belief or move in a different direction, it's very uncomfortable and we resist that new information. In fact, we downright refute that new information. We see this played out all across our society. So I want you to hold this with you today as you hear from Quanice and Tasidra, the things that they asked you to sit with and to consider in your organizations and in your work. And finally, this quote that we're going to come back to when you go to breakout rooms. We really don't know who it's attributed to. I put 3 people there that I've seen that have gotten credit for it. But the idea that every system, every organization is perfectly designed to get the results that it yields. Think about your organization and the systems and structures that are there and the results that they get, and then ponder why that is so. We're going to unpack that today in a variety of ways. So it gives me great pleasure to, we don't need to clarify our purpose, we'll get to that later. It gives me great pleasure to get right here to introduce Quanice and Tasidra. And you are partially right, Liz. I do have a personal relationship with them in that Quanice and I have talked twice via Zoom and phone calls. She is a friend of a mutual colleague, Alicia Lee, who's the founder of the Sister Cities Girls Choir. And that's how I got to know Quanice, who is a Renaissance woman who wears many caps. We talk about her putting on her hat as an educator, an administrator who has taught elementary school, general music, chorus, band, orchestra, and all of that stuff, and does a lot of work advancing access, diversity, inclusion, and equity from her hat and her role there with the Music Educators Association. But also her other hat that she brings today is as the founder and director of the Arts Administrators of Color Network, which is an organization committed to empowering artists and arts administrators of color. And so we're delighted to have Quanice join us today. And then Tasidra Jones, who is a friend who is here locally in the Twin Cities, passionate about creating systems that allow more people to thrive. Tasidra is an artist and a lawyer and an entrepreneur who works at the intersections of connecting individuals and communities to design more holistic programs and to create policies that serve wider bodies of people. So I know you join me in giving them both a big welcome today. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Quanice for her presentation first. Welcome, Quanice.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to share my presentation. And so for my presentation today, I'm calling it Deconstructing the Arts Nonprofit. And so I will be providing a few case studies and just kind of pushing us to think a little bit outside the box and to challenge the norms that we're so comfortable being in. But first, I just want to give you an agenda. I'll give you a brief introduction of who I am. I know Philip just gave you a great introduction of my bio, and so I'll just talk a little bit about who I am and what I do in a little bit more depth. And then talking about like decolonizing what the Arts Nonprofit Board would look like, or just in general, just thinking about what decolonizing the nonprofit sector looks like. I wanted to relate it to today, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 is bringing a lot of opportunity to challenge the status quo and these social norms. And then I have a case study. If I have a hard stop at 11:30, so if we have time, I have a couple of case studies that we will go over. So the only thing I ask for you today is to think differently, and to be you. We all have our own experiences. We all have our own set of shared values, core values. We all have our own journeys in which we are on different levels. And so I'm asking you to just bring your full self into this conversation, because it will be a conversation and open discussion, but then also to try to think differently, try to think outside of your normal thinking. So just a little bit about me and who I am. I was born and raised in New York City. I came to Washington, D.C. to attend Howard University, which is a historically Black college and university. And so I've been in DC for the past 14 years. I was a public school elementary music educator. So I taught elementary general music, band and orchestra and chorus. And I loved it, loved it, loved it. I transitioned out of being a public school teacher because I wanted to create a more systemic change and to ensure that arts education was accessible to all students, regardless of where they lived and who they were. And so I started working at the National Guild for Community Arts Education in early 2019. And then I recently, well, a year ago, recently got a position as the Executive Director of Arts Education in Maryland schools. And so that's the statewide arts education advocacy organization for the state of Maryland. So we advocate on behalf of the 900,000 public school students who attend the school system. And not only do we advocate for arts education, we advocate for the whole being of the child. So we work very closely in coalitions with different education associations and direct service organizations. And so with that job, I'm considered a lobbyist. So I'm a registered lobbyist, which means I go down to the capital of Maryland, Annapolis, and I basically get paid to yell at people, which is really great. It's particularly men in suits, because those are where a lot of the policy making happens. But also on top of that, I started an organization called the Arts Administrators of Color Network. And I'm gonna go a little bit more into that, but I started that organization in 2016. And the organization is dedicated to providing opportunities, tools, and resources to people of color in the arts. And I am an AU alum. I got my second master's at American University, which is based in DC, in arts management. So my first master's was in music education. My undergrad was in music education. And then my second master's was in arts management. I'm currently a doctoral student in educational leadership with a focus on educational policy. So who are you? And so I know some of you, this question is generally for like people who have served on boards, but just the last question is, have you served on a board? Have you served on a board before? Just so I can understand a little bit more of who's actually in the room. Have you been on the board? Have you not been on the board? So I would love if you all utilize the chat box to put your name, your hometown, your artistic discipline. I know most of you are, in music. So I just wanted to learn a little bit more about you all. So we could take a minute or two. And if you prefer to use and share your pronouns, then that would be great as well. Hi, Lee, and hi, Lily. Hi, Mary. There's two Marys. Hi, Mary Beekman and Mary Farrell. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. Hi, Emily, John, Sonia, Danielle, Meyer, Kevin, Trudy, Nicole. Oh, the third Mary. Hi, Mary. Diane, Bradford, Patricia, Lily, Peter, Megan, Jessica, Sarah. Oh, this is great. Oh, you all are from, mostly the Boston area. That's awesome. Arlen, Kathy, Craig, Aaron. I just want to say hi to everybody. Hi, Claire, Bob. Thank you so much for participating. I see a few of you have served on boards. Some folks haven't served on boards. I see middle school teachers. I see a lot of well-rounded professional musicians. This is great. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Music directors, This is really great information to learn. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my organization as kind of a brief case study. So Arts Administrators of Color Network is a organization, again, dedicated to people of color in the arts, founded in 2016. And we have 5 major programs for our organization. We have our mentorship program, which is us bringing together emerging leaders of color and pairing them up with executive level leaders or elder leaders of color within the arts. Networking is the opportunity to meet one another, build networks, build community. Professional development, and so we provide, based on the information and the data that we take, we provide a series of different events. So most recently, we had a webinar about contract negotiations, and we partnered with Washington Area Lawyers for the Arts. We have another one coming up specifically about legal matters for arts administrators, and that's also with Washington Area Lawyers for the Arts. We have an additional one, so we have 2 this weekend, and so one is the Washington Area Lawyers for the Arts, and then the other one is healing within the arts, and so we have an art therapist who will be hosting a 2-hour webinar for folks in the field. We have our annual convening, which is a pretty much a conference, but when it started off in 2017, where we only had about 85 people, and we partnered with American University. So for those who are familiar with American University in DC, we're right in the center of Tenleytown. So it's had about 85 people. And then in 2018, we grew. It had about 125 people. And we had our convening that year in Baltimore. And then last year in 2019, we had 368 leaders of color in Washington, D.C., in partnership with Eaton Hotel, which is an arts and social justice hotel that just opened about 1.5 years ago. And so one of the things I really want to point out is the need, because when we think about conferences, usually we want more people to come. And then for our organization, we don't necessarily want more people to come because that tells us that there's more need within the field and that we still have a lot more work to do. And so when we approach things, just speaking about the Arts Administrators of Color Board, a lot of things that we approach it from what would the world look like once we accomplish our mission? So what can we do to put ourselves out of a job? Right now, this space is necessary and this space is needed because things are shifting within the arts world. And so we're providing that safe space, that comfortable family space for leaders of color. But what can we do to push the field forward so that 10 years from now, we can say, arts world is a truly equitable, truly just world, and we no longer need this type of space. Everybody can be one together. So that's just the way we approach a lot of our thinking and a lot of our programs. And you can hear some of our thinking on our podcast. We have a podcast called Arts Accordingly. You can find it on any podcast platform. It's myself and my board chair, Joshua Jenkins, and we talk about things that are happening within the field. We analyze, we critique it. We usually have an elder arts leader of color come on and tell their story because we often don't hear their stories. We just get the same spiel that there's a lack of people of color in arts administration or arts leadership. So we bring them on and we talk to them about their stories specifically. And then we also come up with calls to action. So it doesn't help anyone to complain and to, just talk about the field over and over again. We really want to see change. And so we come up with solutions in order for us to see that change. So if you are a podcast wonker, I don't know what they go, podcast wonk, feel free to add the Art Accordingly podcast to your listening if you're interested in learning more. But some other programs that we have is the Sankofa Historical Project. And so we've collected information of elder arts administrators from around the United States. So we have over 300 elder arts leaders of color And we plan on interviewing them and documenting their stories and their narratives so that we can uplift them. So that for the entire field, so the field knows, these stories. And so we also have the Accomplice Leadership Institute, which is a program that's strictly dedicated to white arts leaders, because we want to build accomplices in the field, in the work, and people. We want more people working in solidarity and in liberation with people of color in the arts. And so this is a very, very fleshed out program. We just piloted it at the Alliance for American Theaters and Education conference a couple of weeks ago, and it sold out. And so it's an opportunity for arts leaders, particularly white arts leaders from around the country, to come together to build community, but also to learn more about what anti-racism looks like in the arts, to learn more about what decolonization looks like in the arts. And then when someone completes the program, they leave the program with a plan of action. So it's an opportunity for them to dissect the things that they do internally in the workplace, interpersonally, and then put that into action. And so we plan on having kind of extensive programming beyond the actual intensive program itself, so that we can stay in touch with the folks who've been through it, and we can utilize them as volunteers, and we can continue to provide resources and professional development opportunities for them. And then last but not least is our emergency fund. So during COVID, even though we're not a funder, we sprang into action because we realized there are a lot of funding opportunities out there, but a lot of people of color within the arts, particularly teaching artists and independent artists, were not able to either access the funds or they didn't know about the funds. And so we created our own emergency fund. We've received over 13,000 applications nationally, and these are micro grants of only $200. So if 13,000 people need $200, we can imagine what the real need is, because they're just trying to get, $200 here, $500 there, maybe 5,000 here. So they're trying to get access, so that, because a lot of these people are out of work. So they're trying to make sure that we can help them pay for, their medicine and their rent, and to make sure that they're able to live, right? Like, we're not asking them to do a project. We're not asking them to perform for us. We're just making sure that they are who they say they are, and then we give them the money. Thus far, we've raised about $120,000, which is not even close to the need, since it's 13,000, which is over $3 million in need. So we're continuously fundraising for that. It's an indefinite emergency fund. So we're always raising money, and we're always taking applications, because we never know who needs help, and we're always continuing to try to support folks who need help. So this brings me to some interesting conversations of how do we decolonize and deconstruct not only the board structure, but nonprofits in general, right? Like, it seems that there's a lot of conversations around, like, what does it look like? What does anti-racism in the arts look like? What does liberation in the arts look like? How can we all work together and move forward in this work together? And so one of the vital things that I think is truly important is acknowledging histories and structure. Like Philip said, I wear many hats. So I'm also a commissioner for the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities. I sit on the commission. And so I see a lot of structures that are in place that have previously caused harm. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the commission is intentionally causing harm, but this is historical background that has happened over the years. And so we have to think about the things that our organizations have done before we even got there. Like, what has happened within the community? Have there been any instances? I've heard a few organizations would have conferences and people would be protesting. So what has that organization done for folks to, revolt against or protest against some of their structures that they have going on? And then also, how do we decolonize is thinking that scarcity doesn't exist. We have to approach everything from a non-scarcity model. I know the nonprofit sector in general is just all about, like, there's a lack of funding. We have to get funding. We need to get funding. We got to do this. But I can tell you personally, from Arts Administrators of Color Network, my organization doesn't really raise money. And we're able, based on the the connections and the partnerships that we work with, we're able to pay a lot, not pay, we're able to get a lot of spaces, we're able to get a lot of resources, we're able to get a lot, like our organization is a $50,000 organization. And now we're pushing out, over $120,000 for raising money for the emergency fund. But other than that, when we have our programs, we don't have folks, we don't have money to pay speakers. Most of our speakers volunteer themselves because they realize that there's a need. We wish we can. Hopefully we'll get to some place where we are able to pay them, but we are literally coming to people, with the Band-Aid off of our, cuts and bruises, and letting them know, hey, this is what our mission is, and we really, really need your help to help us move this mission forward. We don't have funding. We're just trying to make do with what we have and try to make the world a better place. So in regards to nonprofits, like that is so embedded in us that we always have to be continuously looking for money, but then always like trying to one-up one another. And I think that's intentional, and I can go a little bit more into that, but I can talk offline with folks if they want to have more of a conversation about that. But we have to learn how to be more collaborative together in the nonprofit field so that we can, say if one organization has access to, a performing arts center, and you have a concert coming up at your organization, but you don't have the funds to pay $20,000 for a choral concert at, in June 2025 or something like that. So what can we all do to kind of be better partners to one another and to support one another? And that's what I've personally found with Arts Administrators of Color Network. Less hierarchy and more decision-making. I know that sounds really, really scary because especially in the nonprofit world, we are structured as like board, ED, staff, community, and, the constituents. And so we have to really, really think about who we're serving and are we actually meeting the needs of the folks that we're serving? As a person, someone from the arts education world, we're doing a lot of conversations around arts education and arts education policy, but I have never heard a policymaker talk about the students. I've never heard them say, let's bring students in. And students are the ones who are most affected by the decisions that we make. So the same goes for a nonprofit, right? Like you have a mission, you have a vision, you have, your strategies that you do to implement and incorporate your mission into your programs. Who are your constituents and how can we listen to them more? How can we help them, how can we help ourselves and be more open and be more honest and have genuine, authentic relationships with our constituents? And then practice transformative justice and community accountability. I'm really, really big about accountability and making sure that everything that we do gets the approval of our community and our constituents. And so practicing that it takes a while to get used to that because we're so used to the structure of nonprofits. We're often, the staff might work on an idea and they go to the ED and the ED goes to the board and tells them, hey, we have an upcoming program. But is that program really satisfying the needs, again, of the community that you all are serving? And then working ourselves out of a nonprofit. So I do this every day. Every day, my goal is to figure out what step will take me closer to making sure that I no longer have a job in this field. And I know that sounds so scary for a lot of people because we have bills to pay. I understand, I know. But the purpose of, if you know the histories of nonprofit, the purpose of the nonprofit was to be able to satisfy things that weren't being satisfied by public sector and private sector. And so we are trying to figure out, we're trying to solve those issues that they aren't able to solve in those two sectors. So what can we do to continuously work towards actually solving that issue? And if we're working on this issue for 50 years, 75 years, 125 years, are we actually solving the issue or are we just perpetuating the issue over and over again? And so I think about nonprofits during the time of COVID. And so it's really fascinating to me. We see the word pivot a lot. I know a lot of you have seen that word. We want to pivot. We want to pivot. Pivot is the next, trend in the arts field. And so a lot of things that have been happening specifically during COVID is that we need to actually really, just like I said before, address the things that have been happening, but then also think of creative ways to move forward. Um, Specifically, there's a new cultural deal. I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but it's a letter by arts leaders from all around the United States that basically say we want a better cultural arts field. And it comes up with suggestions that you all can, implement within your own work. And it comes up with, ideas and opportunities. This is a very idealistic, ambitious letter. And there's nothing wrong with idealism. I think a lot of people say, oh, that's idealistic, or that's ideal, and meaning that we can't do it. And there's no hurting in trying to reach that idealism. Like idealism, just because it seems like it's ideal, doesn't necessarily mean we can't strive for it. And so I think we need to rethink about what does the field look like in an ideal setting, and then bring that, like implement those strategies to get to that ideal. We may never reach the ideal, right? But it doesn't hurt us to reach and to keep trying for that ideal situation. And then also, what's happening in the arts, especially since everybody's moving in the remote way, there's a lot more hierarchy. I know specifically with some colleagues of mine where, senior leadership implements more structures because of the remote setting. And so sometimes that doesn't necessarily help the situation. COVID-19 is a I want to say it's a once in a lifetime thing. I don't even know if it is anymore. It seems like it's part of our everyday lives. But it is a once in a lifetime event that takes a huge toll on all of us, mentally, emotionally, physically. And then on top of that, there's things happening with the social justice movements like Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd incident and all of the other situations. And so a lot of people are taking on a lot of things from the world. And I'm a huge believer in being empathic and feeling like the world. And I definitely feel the world when there's times of turmoil. But being able to understand that we might not need more structure during this time. We might need to just take a breath. We might need to have more openness and more flexibility and more adaptability so that we can take care of ourselves, but then also making sure that the work is still getting done. And then also with COVID, I see a lack of unity. I'm based in DC. I live in DC, but my work is DC, Maryland, Virginia, Baltimore area. And so the lack of unity is almost mind-boggling to me in a way. And so an example is that I have personally reached out to organizations to talk about coming together and actually uniting and pushing forward and providing some type of either direct services or some type of, thinking about the wholeness of my constituents, which are students. So how can I can't advocate for arts education as an arts education lobbyist if my students don't have their basic needs of food, they don't have their basic needs of water, they don't have a laptop because they can't do remote learning, they don't have high-speed internet. My students can't do that. My constituents aren't able to think about arts. Their parents aren't able to think about arts if their basic needs are not met. And so what can I do to partner with other organizations to see that these things are happening? And so what my organization has done is we have partnered with additional education advocacy organizations to team up to support and push out food stations for students who are not necessarily getting food at home. We teamed up with the Baltimore Digital Equity Coalition, and we worked with Comcast to make sure that students students who are in Baltimore City get access to high-speed internet. And so thinking outside of the mainframe of for me personally, for arts education, or thinking outside of the work that you all do, can help push that unity forward. Because then you can have all types of players. You can have not just people who are in the arts as your partners, but people who could be in policy, or people who could be in different types of organizations that you wouldn't necessarily think of. So think of the arts as kind of like arts and ... So whatever you think can happen, whatever that ... is a way to think about how your constituents get their basic needs along with handling the issues that they're dealing with during this time, and then expanding and working with those organizations to ensure that they're getting those needs met. And then, yeah, not reevaluating structures. Again, we have to be really adaptable. We have to be flexible. We have to just move. We have to be right now we have to be kind of like Play-Doh, right? We have to be responsive to the needs of our constituents. We have to, if someone needs us to be in the shape, I know that sounds crazy because people always talk about mission drift, and it's not necessarily a mission drift if you're understanding who your constituents are and you're understanding who your community is. So I see some of the things that I'm seeing is that everyone wants to say, hey, we're going to do business as usual. And in a time of COVID, it's not business as usual. It's business as whatever the hell it is right now, right? Like we have to adapt and we have to be responsive to those needs. And so I had a case study, but I do really have to go because I just received a text from one of my colleagues about a meeting I have next. But I wanted to bring up the Kluge-Ruhe Aboriginal Art Collection. It's based at the University of Virginia. They are really, really connected to the indigenous Aboriginal community. And they have like videos on their sites. You can look at their art collection. So I would definitely recommend you all look more into them. But they have indigenous artists in residence programs. They connect an Aboriginal artist with students from University of Virginia, and it's such a authentic, genuine relationship that it's rare to see in the arts. Like it's a rarity. So they're supporting indigenous artists, but then at the same time bringing that culture to a greater understanding of how our liberation is all connected together. And so this is my last slide, and I could probably take like 1 or 2 questions, but I can also leave my email address in the chat box in case you all have questions, and then you can reach out to me. Is that, Barack Obama said crisis is a great time for opportunity. And I think this is our time, the arts world, this is our time. We have to acknowledge and reconcile the history that we've done. We have to recognize and fix harms that we might have done. We have to bring equity and authentic community building to the forefront. We need to be innovative. We need creativity. And of course, now we need technology more than ever because we're unable to meet in person. So there's so much room for innovation that we can literally change the entire field, and we can make it so that, at points in times, performing arts centers had, 3,000 people. We can't do that anymore. So what does that look like? How can we bring our communities together without necessarily being in person, right? And then one thing I'd really, really like to acknowledge is that failing is okay. I think that's something embedded within the nonprofit structure, is that we don't want to fail, and failing is a part of learning. So when it comes to a lot of this equity work, decolonizing, anti-racism, as long as you are transparent about the work you're doing and making a change, you can fail as much as you want to, but just be open, be honest, be transparent about the work that you're doing and how you plan on fixing those failures. So yeah, I'm gonna put my chat in the box. I'm so sorry that I have to leave, Philip.
It's okay, Quanice. I'm going to ask you offline. I'll ask you in front of everybody. We can talk offline. So
Okay.
we are going to, for everyone, we're going to offer a talk back this Sunday to try a different way to get more engagement. And so I'll be available at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And Quanice, if you're available, you can join me for part of that. Otherwise, folks, if you put questions in the chat now for Quanice, what I'll do is coordinate with her. We can put them on our form and make sure you all can contact her via her email, but also through the Table for More form here as well. I just really appreciate how you challenge us to think about our system structure from the standpoint of hierarchy and allowing for more room for interaction and conversation, and just, deconstructing the levelization of leadership and who's at the table asking questions. I think that's so critical for us, and giving us permission to fail also is something that we know, but we need to hear over and over. So thank you for being here. Get to your meeting, and you and I will be in touch.
Awesome.
Right.
Well, thank you all. Please feel free to reach out to me. I put my email address in the chat. So thank you.
Thank you, Quanice. All right, everyone. So do put questions in the chat for Juanice there. And like I said, we'll make use of our forum as well. But I wanted to keep the time rolling because we want you to have 20 to 25 minutes in small group breakouts today to process what you're hearing. So I'm going to invite Tassidra to share your materials and take us through your presentation. Tassidra, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Philip. Well, I'm going to share my screen here, and good morning to everybody. What a wonderful presentation by Juanice. Just great work. I know she's gone, but phenomenal work she's doing. So again, as Philip said, my name is Tassidra Jones, and I'm based here in the Twin Cities. And so today, just want to, my background, I grew up in a huge family, and we use a lot of storytelling. And I spend a great deal of my time with people who are 80 plus. And so I also speak in a lot of parables and short quotes. And so there will be a lot of those sprinkled throughout today. And so before we get going, I want to take a moment to just talk a little bit more about myself. I know Philip gave an introduction in terms of my bio earlier, but I like to talk about my intersections because I think in life, often we can try to fit in one box, and in even looking at the way that folks introduce themselves, people seem to wear a lot of different hats, as Juanice had mentioned. And I think I like to try and show up in the space as a whole person. And so my different intersections, I'm an artist, a lawyer, and an entrepreneur. And when people hear that, sometimes they have questions, but in my mind, it all kind of makes sense. The reasons for that being that when I was a kid, I remember my dad asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said everything. He said, you can't do that. And this is where I landed. We're on these three things as a little kid. And the reason why is because as a kid, growing up, my family, we watched a lot of movies in terms of documentaries and things related to history and community and justice. And one thing I noticed in every single movie where someone was fighting for justice is that art was the one thing that brought people together, regardless of what laws were in place, regardless of who said you could and could not do this, that, or the other. If somebody were listening to their jam and their artist was on playing their song, it didn't matter. They were going to dance and they were going to go to that concert. And so that was really clear for me, that art has the power to bring people together regardless of what other systems exist. And then in addition with being the entrepreneur side, for the communities that couldn't gain access to the things that they needed, a lot of people in community had to step up and build those businesses, build those systems. And so ensuring that people could have access to what they need. And lastly, the legal portion for me being that in most of those movies, there's usually some lawyer advocating for something and trying to change those laws and policies. And I figured if the art, once you bring people together, how do we actually start to change these policies? And so as an artist, I majored in music. Piano is my primary instrument, but I also sang in a number of different ensembles and chamber groups and traveled doing that. And then I taught piano for a number of years, as well as musical theater, and did songwriting and playwriting as well. And so in terms of my artist background, that's that base there. And then as it relates to the legal and entrepreneurship side, today in terms of my work, I do work a lot in the arts and culture sector, as well as in economic development, and a lot in that space where it overlaps related to creative placekeeping and looking at how we're thinking about ensuring that cultures and communities are staying intact. And so with that lens, I try to bring those different pieces together in the work that I do day to day as a consultant, but really being driven by this lens of trying to ensure in all the work that we're doing, the programs, policies, initiatives we're creating, that it's allowing for more people and more communities to thrive and have access to what they need to do, what they need to be able to do that. And so with that as a base, we'll then move into talking a little bit more about today's flow. So today with the presentation, I want to address the what, the why, and the how as it relates to thinking about access. Inclusion and equity is the main focus for today, but as I'll show in a moment, I really think there's an intersection with that access, inclusion, and equity being lumped together. And so I want to define that a little bit more for folks in the way that I think about it as I guide my day-to-day. And the why, I'm a data person. On Friday nights, I do enjoy reading census reports with a glass of wine. And so in looking at data, it helps me to understand how our communities are changing. So I want to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing there. And then time to talk about why and when to use a consultant. And then lastly, how we're doing this work. So I'll give an example of an initiative, a project that we had taken on. And then, as I mentioned, the inner 90-year-old in me can't end this without sharing a few words of wisdom from a couple of elders, mentors, and my grandmothers. And so that's our roadmap for today. So the what. So when we think about access, equity, and inclusion, I really think about how access and equity are connected. I can't think about equity without thinking about access. And when I think about inclusion, when we do our work as a consulting group that goes and work with organizations, we do take time to define each of these in detail, and there are lots of definitions out there. But I also try to think about it a little in a simpler form. What I mean by that, one of the things my grandma used to tell me, one of them used to say is, you need to just keep it simple. And when I think about keeping it simple, I think about things that the way that my nieces would think about it, who are very small, 4 or 5 years old. And when I think about inclusion, what comes to mind is thinking about different ways that you can invite somebody into a space. When I think about inclusion, I think about belonging and welcoming. An example for that is, I'm not sure how many of you on the call have ever received an invitation to a dinner party, and you heard all the rest of your friends got this invitation 4 weeks ago, but you got it the day before. And when you get that kind of invitation, do you feel like they really want you there? Probably not. Do you think that they care about your presence in that space? Most likely not. And so when I think about inclusion, it's kind of using that lens of, when you're including others from different backgrounds and bringing them into your space, whether that's as an employee or as a partner, are you doing it in such a way where when they're not at the table with you, you're missing their voice and their presence, and you're thinking about their value? And if you're not, then maybe we need to step out and assess, well, who are you missing at the table, and what is the value of having them at this table? And how do you change the way that you think about having people come to your dinner party? Nobody likes a last minute invitation. And so how do we start to think with this from the forefront, that 3 weeks out period, about who should really be at your table? And so then on the equity and access side of things, when I think about equity, it makes me kind of think about some of the things that Quanice was saying as it relates to systems changes. And so I'm not sure how many of you all are familiar with fractals. And so fractals are these patterns that can occur in nature or in science. And at every level of scale, that image, if you blow it up this big where it takes up the whole wall, or you're looking at it at a microscopic image, it's the same pattern that just keeps repeating. And so if you change one part of that pattern, it can change the whole picture. And so when I think about equity, I'm thinking about the systems, but also thinking about what are those outcomes. And so when we work as consultants, we're looking at the patterns and the data that's showing what is the picture that's being painted. For example, we worked with a client before who had said that, we've been around for 30 years, but every year the people of color leave our organization at 3 to 4 times the rate of everybody else. We're not sure what's happening here. We think everything's fine. And then when you start to unpack and look at that pattern and start to see, well, is it welcoming? Is it inclusive? What is the culture like here in terms of your organization? What opportunities you're providing? What are opportunities for growth and advancement? All of those kinds of things. And if the data and the information is showing disparities in terms of what's happening, then we need to start just naming the fact that something is inequitable in this system and something needs to be adjusted. And so, and that also connects to, do the groups of people who are experiencing this different outcome, are they having access to the same resources, information, and tools as everybody else? And again, if not, we need to look at this picture, this fractal, and change it. And so I'm thinking about that when I talk to organizations about this work, really thinking about, often people talk about diversity, but without access, it's missing the mark. And do we really understand those differences between what's being equitable and truly being inclusive? Just questions to kind of sit with. And so moving on to the why. So in terms of, for me, that the personal basis, as again, I'm a data person. I also work with government entities and spend time talking to folks, and people in government sure do love data and numbers and reports. And so sometimes we can get so wrapped up in the data and the numbers, and then we're kind of forgetting the heart aspect of it, the humanity aspect of it, and the people. And so for me, I want to start with my personal core beliefs, and my compass that guides in this work is really that we have to think about the humanity of others. If we're in a place or operating in systems where people are experiencing starkly different outcomes or access opportunities, would you want that for your sister? Would you want that for your neighbor, for your friend? And if not, then let's think about how we think about the community as a whole. And that's, for me, at that personal level, what drives a lot of the work, is thinking about that, looking at everybody that I see as a neighbor, and a friend. And how do we ensure that you are able to thrive and access what you need to live your best life? Have the opportunity just really at that baseline and equal opportunity to come into the same room, get the same outcome if you want to, whether it's an audition or something else. What does that look like? And so that's really what's driving at the core for me, is just, you know, life has a lot of stuff every day, and it's better when you don't have to deal with some of the muckety muck, as I call it, which we may call it other things too, but that mess we don't want to deal with. And so that's the core piece. But then the broader piece, when I do go into the spaces where I have to talk about the data and the numbers with people who are struggling with why this may be important for them, the fact of the matter is that our world is actually changing from a data perspective. And so, as I mentioned, Friday nights is census night. And so in the last couple of years, the Census Bureau has put out reports looking at demographic shifts for the United States over the next 20 to 30 years. And by the year 2045, the US population for the first time in its history will be majority people of color. In addition, by 2030, that's the year that all baby boomers in the US are going to be over 65. The US population has been aging at a faster rate than we're actually the birth rate since the 1980s. And so we have this increasing aging population. And why this matters for arts nonprofits is, in working with arts nonprofits, one of the things that we hear as a concern for the sustainability for a lot of nonprofits is that their individual donors are aging, and their audience members are aging. And what will happen if they age and we're not able to connect to the younger population or other communities? And so when considering these kind of demographic shifts hand in hand, outside of my own personal core beliefs for the longevity and sustainability of organizations in this work, it would benefit all to be able to think about how to connect with new audience members, new communities, and allow for more people at the table, as this conversation says, to celebrate the different cultures and backgrounds, and maybe open doors for opportunities for new creative ways to share your craft with the world. And so I'm, as a numbers person, think that can add value to seeing that within the next 15 years, we're gonna have a different world in terms of who our neighbors are, who our colleagues are, and being able to think about what to do about that. And so why a consultant may be helpful. And so I know I've worked with people where there's some lenses with consultants where they're just coming in to just bill. That's not my MO. As a number of people have said, it's here to work themselves out of a job. My goal is really I'll do the non-judgmental piece first again, but again, thinking about how to help people thrive. We don't come in with the lens of judgment. It's more of, are you ready to really dig in and have these conversations? And then, all right, if you are, let's figure out how we can do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that approach that we take. The other piece is there's this value of an outside perspective. So one of my grandmothers is from Trinidad and Tobago, or was from Trinidad and Tobago, and she didn't really speak in sentences. She just spoke in parables all the time. And so we'd ask her a question and it just end in a parable. All right, Granny, I'll figure it out at one point in my life. And that's pretty much what she said. You'll know at the right time. But one of the things she used to say is that, donkey can't see his own tail. And pretty much the short of that is that it's hard for you to see your own blind spots. It's hard for you to see your own mess. And sometimes you need an outside perspective to help you look at that bigger picture. And so that's why a consultant can really be helpful, to be able to shine a light on some of those blind spots that an organization may have. All right. So the elements of the consulting approach. So I mentioned taking this approach where there's an internal and an external assessment. The way that we think about our work is really about listening. So listening to the staff, listening to those who are within an internal group for an organization, but then listening to the community served. And so with the internal assessments, what we're really looking at there is taking time to look at the existing infrastructures for an organization, hearing from staff if they have a different experience or different perspectives, but then also helping to think about what are those policies, programs, practices that need to be put in place from that staff lens. But then we also take time to look at the broader community and asking questions about access. Does the broader community find that what you have in place is accessible? And then that big question around, is it welcoming? And what does welcoming look like for community members to be in your space? And so with the work that we do, we'll do a number of different things, whether it's surveys and focus groups, listening sessions, but being able to do both that internal and external listening then helps us to come up with recommendations that are informed by, again, the lovely data, but also the feedback from everybody that we listen to, and allow us to give a set of recommendations related to, this is what we heard and this is what community, staff as a whole, where there's alignment and what people are saying could be a great shift. But then also looking at what we know from a policy and programmatic perspective can allow for change within organizations. And so I just want to give an example of one project that we had done with Vocal Essence, the Listening Zone Initiative. And so with this project, and I'll zip through this, I'm looking at time, but with this project, what we did is we actually engaged over 200 people through focus group surveys and interviews. We engaged first listening externally with different ensemble groups and community members and advisory groups, and then we listened to the staff and the board, and then again listened to the broader community. And what we did through these engagements, asked a number of questions, but also allowed people to share their personal experiences and stories. And then one of our goals was really to try and look at some overlap areas where a change can make a difference. So one of the questions we asked everybody was, when you think of inclusion, access, and equity at your organization, in which of the following areas do you believe a change can make a difference? And we had a long list of different areas that had been populated. And what really showed up, we're really looking at venues, singers, and musical selections. And this isn't something that's unique to the Listening Zone Initiative. This is something that I hear in working with organizations across the board. These three areas come up a lot. And so when you think about venues, singers, musical selection, it's where are you doing this, who's doing it, and what are you singing? and so there are lots of opportunities to fold others in, appreciate different cultures and perspectives, and allow for different ways in which you're able to accomplish these goals that could be more welcoming and more accessible for others. And ultimately, it can lead to more inclusion in an authentic way. And so with that, I'll leave with just a few words of wisdom, as promised. So I have one grandmother who grew up on Johns Island in South Carolina, and she used to tell me that no man is an island. And then my grandmother with the Proverbs used to say, many hands makes work light. And so I mentioned both of those because they have this perspective of the role of community when you think about doing this work. And I have this picture of the baobab tree because there's this proverb. I now speak in Proverbs as well, such that my colleagues have given me a book of Proverbs since I say it so much. But one is that wisdom is like a baobab tree. One individual cannot embrace it. When we think about this work, think about the baobab tree, because sometimes it could become so overwhelming or frustrating when you think about the big systems and you don't know where your role is, that you just can't wrap your head or your hands around it. The baobab tree cannot be wrapped around by one person. It's not intended to be. And changing systems and changing this work is not intended to be solved by one person, but you need to identify who you need at your table. Think about community. Think about those unsuspecting partners and community members that you can work with. And as Kwani said, the field needs to be more collaborative together. How do you think about that and get as many people as you can around that baobab tree to really think about how you want to change and come out with better outcomes in your organization and in the field? And so with that, I'm done, and I thank you all for inviting me to your table today to share a few words of wisdom from my grandmothers and a little bit about our work.
Thank you, Tassidra. It's always great to share space with you and to be at the table with you, and to share the listening zone process for everyone. Just as you were thinking about your organizations, Tassidra has given us a lot to process here. The most important thing, I think, comes from the proverb of your grandmother, your first grandmother you referenced, about a donkey can't see its own tail. I mean, it's so true. And that's, I think, the gist of everything that you said there. And I appreciate you talking about a consultant. I wanted Tassidra to come in because she is an extraordinary consultant, and it's not about the financial piece that she cares about. She really cares about helping the organization to get at the heart of what you care about and then what you're trying to discern. And I think whether your organization, if your organization has the capacity to engage with a consultant, it's something to consider when the timing is right to do that. But if not, these processes, and Tassidra, I do want to ask you about this, not to work you out of a job, but can you say a little bit about how these same processes of internal and external assessment and having an outside perspective can work with a valued colleague who's not a part of your organization, or in a listening zone format, to have other people inform the decisions you're making for those who can afford to pay for a consultant? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are lots of ways to arrive at getting other perspectives. I know a number of organizations may pull together like a community advisory group. I would also advise, again, with that lens of being equitable, is that please provide people stipends if they are going to do that. And so it will cost less than a consultant. But again, with valuing the time, the talents, and the wisdom that community members are bringing to the table, those advisory councils could be a really helpful way to do that. And then having staff who are willing to help lead those discussions. But I think that's one avenue. There are a lot of toolkits out there related to equity and access and inclusion that provide some steps for how to do these kinds of assessments. There are lots of different languages around it, like community listening, assessments, but would really offer that guidance to start with. I would recommend starting listening externally, because that can help guide the compass of, well, what are others seeing that we are, again, the donkey, what are others seeing that we aren't seeing? And that could help to narrow the focus of where you're going. Because I find when you start internally, there could be power struggles and hierarchies, as Cornice had mentioned, such that some staff may not feel heard, or others may take up a lot of space, such that that's the avenue that's going to be taken for direction. But having that community or external voice come in and say, this is what's important, could help to guide that discussion and help to arrive at where your key action items may be. I'm not hearing you, Philip.
No, I turned my mic on mute because my kids are chatting back here.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was just me, so I was trying to look at faces, but no.
No. I was saying thank you and just asking everyone to please put comments for Tassidra in the chat. I will be happy to, send those to her and then get her feedback. She also gave you her contact info if you want to reach out to her directly as well to engage with her. But thanks so much for being here. And I know you've got to slip out at some point too, but stay as long as you can. We're going to move into our breakout groups in a second. And I wanted to bring us back to this quote, everybody, because what both Quanice and Tassidra have set us up for is to get at the heart of this. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. And so what I want you to consider in these presentations as you go to the breakout rooms is, how is your system designed? How is your organization or your ensemble structured? And really be vulnerable with each other. I know we're just getting to know each other, but share into this a little bit of, our organization. And Jess, I'm gonna use your example since you put it in the chat. We perform Baroque music. So let's talk about what that means. What are the skills that it takes to perform the Baroque music? Where do you draw your singers from? What are the processes that you use for people to be a part of the group? These are the things about your system design that then yields, well, why does your group look a certain way? Why does your audience look a certain way? And then the dissonance that I asked you all to sit with last week and the discomfort is here. You're here because you care about diversifying, being more inclusive, being more accessible. Here's where the key comes in. Are your core values tied to the now and what you're currently doing? Or are your core values more tied into wanting to have more people at the table? If that's the case, then you're going to get to step 3 and start leaning into what things in our system can we look at changing. And perhaps this is where an outside perspective will be most helpful for you. So I'm going to ask Liz and the team to send us to the breakout rooms. We're going to spend about 15 minutes there, maybe a little longer, maybe 17. And then we're going to come back and talk at the end. So please hang on, do the breakout time. I'm going to pop into all the rooms and just listen. And then we're going to come back and have a little bit of group time and then prepare for next week as well. Welcome back to the main room, everyone. I have a couple of rooms back. There's 2 types of Zoom people. There are those who wait for the system to bring you back and those who push return to main room as soon as you see the 60 seconds. Maybe there's a third type too. Some of you split the difference in there. So I know I was in room 7. I got to peek into all the rooms this time and just be a fly on the wall for the conversations. And the last room is on their way back. So I think we're all here now. I just want to share a few things based on what I was hearing in the rooms and then see if you have any quick questions and that we can unpack in a few minutes, and then let you know a little bit about getting ready for next week, and let Liz introduce our Sunday talk back officially. And then I do have a few minutes to hang on extra again, just if we don't wrap up some loose ends. So from the conversations, the one thing that I want to share with you all is to remind you that we are not going to change overnight. And if we did change overnight, the question would be, would it be sincere change that's sustainable? So don't beat yourself up if you realize there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done. That's just the reality. And what I want you to be thinking about in these conversations are, what are the small, sustainable steps that are systematic and intentional? So are you going to address programmatic sides of things and repertoire and intentionality about the composers you engage with and the compositions you perform? Are you going to engage about venues and locations, and specifically just think about where you do your activity? You could just, again, each of those tracks will be meaningful change. Are you going to look at, talking about people and diversifying your ensemble and the participants? I will say that's the most difficult and long process. All the three of those processes involve a layer of unpacking, as both Quanice and Tasidra said, the systematic structure of your organization. And it requires you to ask the question, who's going to shift and how are they going to shift? Because let's not mistake it. Someone's always shifting when we are engaging in groups. And when you're dealing with people who are outside the table, when we want to bring them in, we often want to bring them in under our terms. Going back to the first conversation of, I'm going to invite you to dinner, but I picked all the ingredients, all the spices, so you're going to eat my food the way that I prepared. It may be chili, but my chili is going to be different than your chili, but you're going to eat my chili. And so what we've got to do is to go back and now create this chili together. And that's where a listening zone type initiative comes in handy. Are you seeing everyone through your same cultural lens? Or are you beginning to see them through their cultural lens and inviting that into the perspective of the conversations that you're having? Because I ask myself this question as a Black man: why would my Black friends who sing in Second Baptist Church want to sing with me in Vocal Essence? Like, why would they want to sing with me? They're having a great singing experience where they are. Why should they come sing with me? Like, what is it about that what I'm doing that's going to make them want to sing with me? And that was a hard thing for me to unpack, to realize that, yeah, I like to live in both worlds, but why does someone else want to come sing with us? And it's okay if some people don't want to, but that's the question we have to understand, of what space are we giving them to come in and participate with us. Language matters, and so I want you to begin to question your language. One word that I have eliminated from my vocabulary in these conversations is people served. When we say that we're serving someone, think about the implications of that. We are giving something to them that they can't get themselves. And we don't know that to be true. We are providing them with something that they need that they may not know that they need. That also may not be true. So I have shifted exclusively to the term engage with. Whenever that comes up in our organizations, whether it be at church, I'm at a Lutheran church now that's predominantly white, and at Vocal Essence, I strike it from the copy. People got so mad at me 2 weeks ago because we were in the final copy for our gala, our virtual gala, and I struck it out the day of. I was like, why didn't I see this script? We are not going to say served. We do not talk that way, because that's not the language. That's not our framework. We engage with people, we partner with people, and we may not be completely partnering yet, but that's the goal. So we're going to use that language. So words really, really, really matter. And then I want you to, again, taking from Tasidra and Quanice, thinking about unusual partnerships. Both of them talked about that in different ways. But thinking about unusual partnerships could be the way, Sonia, that Lorelei can get at the fact that there's 9 women on stage. We're not asking you to bring a Black woman onto the group. Yes, that would be wonderful, but it could also be tokenism, right? If we're not careful. Instead, can Lorelei collaborate in an unusual way with communities of color in meaningful ways through programming and through the impact of the programming, so that communities of color are beneficiaries of and partners in this program? And we'll talk a lot about that in week 4 when we start looking at unpacking some of these action plans. So I said like 2 minutes more than I wanted to. Is there something that's burning on someone's mind that you want to say now before we kind of pause here and turn it over to Liz to do our official close before the post talk? anything? It's so great to have you with us. All right, Liz, I'm gonna let you jump in and introduce our Sunday thing that we're gonna try.
Wonderful. So we want to open a few different pathways for you to respond to this material. So in addition to the forum, which is still available, and that information was just sent by Jess Cooper. Thank you, Jess. There is a quick form that I've generated, and this is anonymous, and I'm dropping it in the chat right now. And this is very simply, and we've actually worked with this at Harvard a bit, and it's been very successful. What's on your mind? So this is a response to today, a response to some of the nuggets that you heard, maybe that you're holding on to for future consideration. It could be a question that's been burning that you feel hasn't been answered yet. It could be what you had for breakfast and you just thought it was a really great breakfast. It could be anything that is on your mind. And we just want to hear it in a way that is very informal and not tied to any name or association. Just what is the response? We are also trying on this end to very much make sure that this is responsive to your feedback. So this would be a place to drop feedback about our production as well. All right, so there's a second way. The third way is we are going to offer Sunday brunch with Philip. And this is going off of our table for more. So this is bring your own morsels. This can be any of those things we just talked about in terms of what is on your mind. So he will have basically an open brunch time this coming Sunday from 2 to 3 Eastern time, 1 to 2 Central time. Just drop in when you can during that hour. He will be available to chat. The Zoom link and password are exactly the same as today, but they're there for you as well. So any one of these 3 options are available to you if you'd like to continue the conversation.
Great, thank you, Liz. And thank you everybody for being a part of this conversation. I value the fact that you're here in the room, just having the conversation. So I want to affirm your intentions and know that your systems will continue to change and shift to get the results that you really want to see happen over time. So hang in there, be well, take care of yourselves, take moments to breathe. I'm saying that for me too. And we'll see you on Sunday or next Wednesday. We'll have Marcus Garrett and Daryl Taylor with us talking about repertoire next week.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you all for being here.